Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Blue Leadership with your host, Dennis Nayor. Dennis is a 25-year law enforcement veteran and retired chief from the state of New York. He's also a proud graduate of the 240th session of the FBI National Academy and is the 61st session of the FBI LEDA Command Institute. The Blue Leadership video podcast is brought to you by the nationally ranked Master of Science in Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership Program at the University of San Diego. You can learn more about the LEPSL program at criminaljustice.sandiego.edu. And with that, I will kick things over to your host to introduce our featured guest. Thank you.
Kylie, thank you. And so today we have Captain Jim Britt of the Seattle Police Department. I think this is going to be an awesome interview because I think there's so many things going on in Seattle that really require solid quality leadership. And Captain Britt is an alumnus of the LEPSL program that Kylie just spoke about. So Captain Britt, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah, and just a little bit more about the captain. He has 19 years in law enforcement with the Seattle PD. His recent promotion, the captain, I'm sure will definitely tie into a lot of his leadership studies from LEPSL. And interestingly, he also has his undergraduate degree, a BA in political science from the University of San Diego. So there's going to be a lot of great info from here. So, Captain, I'm going to ask for the very first question, just the leadership challenges over the last 18 months specifically. I mean, we look at it, we had a global pandemic, and Seattle was one of the first places in the United States that COVID was noticed. And then the civil unrest and protests, and Seattle was, definitely one of the places that got a lot of attention because of that. Changes in leadership, so much. Can you just talk a little bit about what that's been like for you?
Sure. Seattle has made news almost constantly throughout the last year and a half to 2 years of unrest. And, we faced a lot of the same challenges every other agency has. Being the epicenter of the original breakout of COVID, as much as that might have seemed like we were going to be in a bad spot, it actually turned out for us that we were managing to get ahead of it. And so as a result, we've actually done pretty well. Seattle PD itself has had 110 positive or so, about 110 positive tests for COVID between our employees and 0 fatalities thus far, which we've been very grateful for. I hate to say thus far, but you never know. It's a pretty wicked affliction. And then, of course, the unrest of 2020 led to several things. The protests were challenging, just the same as they were for any other agency out there that was dealing with large-scale violent demonstrations. Ours tended to make the news because, well, they were a little bigger, a little more violent, and a lot more things on fire, which the news just loves to show. But we had the ongoing standoff up on the Capitol Hill outside the East Precinct, the political decisions that led to the removal of the barricade, the withdrawing of officers, and the eventual setup of what became known as the CHOP or CHAZ, depending on what time you tuned into that. Initially, they called themselves the Autonomous Zone, and then the protesters, I think, began to realize that it was problematic to call yourselves autonomous because that had connotations of sovereign states, and so they changed it to the Occupied Protest. And I think about 20 days or so of that, which we had to go in and clean up, but that was obviously a lot of kind of a more focused version of what a lot of other folks were dealing with. But one of the unique factors that we were dealing with in Seattle was what all of these protests came on the heels of. Many people are aware that Seattle has been under a federal consent decree since 2012. And many officers felt that the accusations were never proven and rather unjust. But we entered into a settlement agreement with the federal government. And through 8 years, we became what many people called the model for reform. Our chief was lauded by President Obama at the time, and our city government in April of 2020 came out and said, they're the model for reform. We should be removed from the consent decree. They applied for dissolving of the consent decree. And then a month later, because of something that happened 1,400 miles away, all of a sudden, all of that changed. So our officers and our agency were faced with a fair amount of whiplash emotional whiplash that I think exacerbated even to a greater scale than many other agencies felt the difficulties that we were facing and the challenges that leaders faced to just getting officers to show up, let alone actually go out and do our work. So there were definitely some challenges. And then even on the heels of that coming in, the defund movement struck Seattle rather heavily. The city council initially voted to a 50% reduction of the police department until they realized what that actually would look like. Now, we did suffer drops. We had a 17% reduction in our budget. Some of that was just moving parts out. We've moved the communication center, our dispatchers, out from under the police department. As soon as last week, it was voted to remove our parking enforcement out as well. And so a lot of it's more just symbolic movement, but there were several severe cuts to our operations budget that have reduced our functionality in several locations and increased response times, reduced number of officers on the streets. The uncertainty of the budget has also led to officers who could leave, departing either in retirements or resignations or leaving for other agencies. Some officers saying they're done with law enforcement altogether. So we faced a lot of the same challenges, but they seem to all come at the same time here in Seattle.
Yeah, and likewise, being a chief in a smaller city with similar dynamics, all very similar to things that we were experiencing. And, I know Perf actually put out an article and they say the chiefs that were and the leaders that are best able to bring about the reforms are often the ones that are moving along because of the politics. And that's just such a sad thing, especially, obviously Chief Best brought along so many positive things to the department. And then when the city council is cutting, or suspending 100 positions and slashing the budget, you just can't make ends meet. One of the things that is, I think we all can agree on in that anything you want to improve upon, you invest in it. It's just a common known factor, your health, your education, whatever it is, your house. If you want to improve something, you invest. And so the entire defund movement is just so anti that improvement of such an important profession. And I'd like to talk a little about what you just touched on with the staffing. So right now you may have and this is really where your leadership as a captain, I'm sure, comes into play. You may have calls stacked that people have to wait maybe an hour because you're functioning at around 1,100 officers, where truthfully you should probably be functioning at 2,000.
That's correct. Yeah, our staffing has suffered. We've lost over 200 officers in the last 18 months, in the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021 combined, we've lost over 200 officers. We have not been able to replace nearly that many. And our response times have gone up. And there's been a lot of discussion about what can be taken off the plate of officers. And, the alternative responses that such a reimagining policing is the term that gets thrown out there. And the concepts of looking at different ways of handling the calls. One of the problems we've run into, though, is, and I think I'm digressing a little bit off of your initial question, but one of the problems we run into is this idea that, we don't want the police department to do that anymore. And you've got a bunch of dedicated police officers that have worked very hard to control whatever issue we're dealing with, be it homelessness or mental health crisis or different issues that pop up. And you've got dedicated cops who are saying, well, that's fine, but who do you want me to hand this work to? We don't want to just put it down because we'll lose control of it. Not we as a department, but we as a city, it will go unchecked. They said, well, don't worry about that. We don't want you to do that. And as a result, crime has spiked. We've got a lot of different issues popping up throughout the city with increased response times, reduced capabilities for officers. And then recent state laws have even hamstrung us even further with what we can do even when we are able to get there and respond. And so there's a lot of frustration that's led to reduced staffing. Even under, we've done studies, we've had companies come in and evaluate what we would need. We're working on a current research study right now to actually quantify the work asked of by Seattle officers. And from that, actually work on what staffing would look like. And every one of them comes back and says, you need anywhere from 100 to 400 more patrol officers, not just police officers in the city, but actual officers answering 911 calls.
Right. And you look at the DOJ statistics, it should be on average 2.4 officers per 1,000. And if you're a city of 724,000, you're well below that. And, the fact is, it's amazing what you are accomplishing with what you have. And that obviously we can talk so much more on, but we won't right now. But obviously the affects the officer wellness and the morale and the burnout and fatigue. And I know that Seattle PD was actually lauded for one of the most positive ways of recruiting, because you were given like $15,000 sign-on bonuses, but now that's not even good enough to draw in candidates for you.
No, we're definitely facing some recruiting challenges. I mean, law enforcement as a whole across the country has massive shortfalls. Pretty much every major city is carrying at least 100 vacancies that I know of. I think in Washington alone, we're down 1,000 officers statewide, and recruitment's just not there. Now you can credit that to a booming economy. You can credit that to the change in recruitment. It used to be we'd go to the military bases and say, hey, you're getting out of the military, come on over and be a cop. And, for a variety of reasons, whether agreed with them or not, they've decided to target different demographics. They want social workers. They want customer service people. They want folks who are trained differently than your average military member. And as a result, you're competing with the private sector. And the private sector is able to say, hey, come on over, we'll pay you really well, we'll give you benefits, and no one tries to kill you at work. So that's not a bad sales pitch. And when the table next to them says, come on over, we'll pay you meager, you might get treated pretty poorly by both elected officials and the public, and there's a decent chance you could get hurt or killed here. So that's a pretty tough recruiting tag to throw out there. But we're trying. There's still a bunch of dedicated folks that are coming in and putting it on the line and joining up because they want to make a difference.
And what a perfect segue, because you look at the dangers we always understood to align with law enforcement, but now we have new ones such as doxxing, and with all of the protests, it's enough that the officers are there. They're the ones being protested against, and yet they're right on the front lines to receive such horrible treatment. And I know that you personally experienced doxing, and I was hoping you could maybe share how that affected you and your experience with that as well.
Sure. Last summer, during the protests, we transferred to what's called our blue gold schedule, which basically means we work every day, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, no days off until we get this under control. And so I was at work and I got a text from my wife, and it said I was running a group of National Guardsmen that week, just doing infrastructure protection for that night. And I got a call or text from my wife, said, hey, you're going to hear from the police department in our town. I live just outside Seattle. And I said, everything okay? And she said, no, not really. Well, what had happened, they had been notified that my house, my address, and a picture of my patrol car, which was sitting across the street from my house, had been posted on a person's social media with the words, officer lives here, burn it down. And so, of course, I excused myself from work and went home. And my boss, I was very grateful for my boss's support to stay home and take care of my family. I made arrangements to have them kind of get out of the area for a while. Unfortunately, Washington state public disclosure laws are such that we really can't protect any of our personal information. It's out there. You're allowed to know when I work. You're allowed to know my schedule. You're allowed to know what houses I own, my rank, all the other information. It's all very, very public to members that want to look it up and compile it. And there are people out there in Washington state specifically that do nothing but compile this information. The aftermath, unfortunately, was that the local police department could not prove the case because the evidence was gone by the time they were able to go and get it, and none of the witnesses were all that cooperative. So charges were never filed. But my local police department where I live was kind enough to step up patrols around my house. We made some improvements in cameras and fire extinguishers and making sure that my wife was familiar with the defenses in the house. So we managed to fare well. I have great neighbors who took very good care of my family while I was back at work when I had to go back. But it was a pretty harrowing experience, and one of those cases I bring up when we discuss the idea of making officers live in their jurisdiction. I have to remind people that not everybody likes the friendliest police officer in the world could still end up being in somebody's crosshairs, and vitriol and hatred can be spewed their way. And is it worth having their family wrapped up in the wash of that?
For sure. And, the families deal with so much of, the repercussions of someone's career in law enforcement. But that's, a whole another step that no family needs to have to be part of. And we had that as well. One of my deputy chiefs, same thing happened. And it was just people were looking specifically to find information that they can attack and assail in whatever way, whether it's online or whether it's showing up at a person's house. And, again, that was another dynamic that leadership was required to find adjustments for. I think, as we look at where things are with policing, how has your LEPSL studies transitioned to helping you to manage these things, whether it's you personally being doxxed or finding ways to make that, where people aren't getting days off and keeping your officers well and knowing that they're burning out and that they're being treated so poorly. Can you just talk a little bit for the listeners and viewers how your LEPSL studies have kind of maybe helped you address those things?
Sure. The day-to-day value of the LEPSL program was really incredible to me, given I work at headquarters now after almost 17 years of operational work on the street. I got moved to headquarters to do some more administrative type duties, but I touched a lot of different parts of the department as we focused on technology. And I found that the topics of discussion in each class, as well as the papers and the reports and the weekly posts, all were very relevant to our daily work. And so the first thing I noted was the value of the classwork being applied to the daily work. The example that comes to mind was the data fluency and analysis for law enforcement course, which a lot of people would find mundane and very boring because it's all data analytics. But in Seattle, we do a lot of data work. We're very, very heavy on data. And the focus of the course was, data is valuable, but at the same time, you have to understand where it comes from and not just sell out to it 100%. We had a report that came out that said a certain percentage of our sexual assaults had increased and our clearance rates weren't matching. And so the question was like, why this sudden increase? And I happened to write a paper the week before about that very topic. And I ended up just tweaking a couple of things and turning it into the chief of our investigations bureau. And my hope is that helped her be ready to answer questions from a reporter the following week. And my understanding is that it did. But the real value for me in the LEPSL program, to be on a more broad scale, especially with the challenges we're facing now, was it solidified my focus on the values that we need to instill as we work in a leadership environment. The world is changing in such a way that you can't rely on external validation anymore in this work. Not everybody's going to come up and pat you on the back and say good work. You hope that the captains and lieutenants and the chiefs will honor good work when it happens, but at the same time, that can't be relied upon every day. It certainly can't be relied upon from anywhere outside the department anymore, especially in a city like Seattle. And there are some cities that take wonderful care of their police officers, but in general, that validation and that intrinsic value of the work that we do has to come from internally, and that has to be instilled from the leadership all the way down. And I believe that comes from a focus on the core principles of police work. And that for each agency we joked about how chiefs come and go so quickly and the reformers especially move on so fast. But you have to be able to instill, and it comes to mind the lessons learned in LEPSL, the transactional versus transformational leadership. Transformational leadership takes time, and it requires long-term dedication and input. And I think that starts with an understanding that the values of the agency have to be set in stone and aligned directly with the values of the officers that sign up for that work. And I think that's the real inherent value that comes from LEPSL, is the focus on that as the future of law enforcement.
Yeah, and I think that your officers under your command, and as a captain, obviously, that's there's a lot that will be directly affected by leadership-based decisions you make, and how fortunate they are to know that 17 of those 19 years are from an operational capacity. And that's huge, because the theory and the academics, I think, is super important. But I think there has to be a firm understanding of the practice and being able to apply it. And when you have the pairing of both the theoretical and the practical, you have the best product you could. So I think that bodes extremely well for the officers of the Seattle PD.
We're hoping so. I think we face the challenge right now of, what the heck would motivate an officer to go out and do the job right now. I mean, I'm blown away by cops showing up each day in Seattle. I really am. Given what we're going through here, I'm inspired and awestruck by the officers that show up and go answer calls, especially those that go and actually seek out those who need help. And it really comes from, and I've talked to them, it comes from an inherent desire to help people. And that's where I think that the focus of police work needs to shift. Not to dovetail into one of the other questions that I know we were talking about was if I could change anything about American policing, it would be the concept that we have to change the way we look at things in regards to what the purpose of law enforcement is. So often the focus has been our job is to catch bad guys and feed them into the criminal justice system. That's our job, putting bad guys in front of judges. But that's a piece of it. But I think if we were to change our focus to the concept that if our job is to help people, how can we do that? And, there's a lot of folks that work from externally outside of law enforcement that look at it as divesting from police work into other things, alternative responses. In Washington, we have the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, which is spread out throughout the country. And it gets poo-pooed by old school cops because, it's different. And that's okay, because we've all come up in different work. But if we were to reframe that to a different concept, which is if our job truly is to help people, how can we help people? So the example of a DUI. Atlanta had an unfortunate circumstance of a DUI in a Wendy's drive-thru that led to a fatal encounter. And it's sad across the board. And regardless of the nature of the outcome, what if the approach could have been different? And that's where I play in my head a little bit with this. If the officers approach that, sometimes the mindset these days is, okay, this guy's drunk. It's my job to arrest him, process him, and put him in front of a judge. What if the process was, okay, this guy needs help. We have to make it safe. We have to make sure that he's safe for however long it takes him to get sober. And then we need to get them the help they need. So if we could secure the vehicle, get the person home, and then make sure that there's some kind of follow-up services that can be brought. Now, again, I know this is pie in the sky and there's a lot more planning that goes into it, but the overall mindset is there. We can shift the focus from a feeder program into criminal justice and instead be professional helpers.
Agreed. And
focus.
Completely agree. And, what you just said is really just approaching policing with a humanistic point of view, right? and how we hire and how we promote, and knowing that that's the legacy that we really want within our profession. And I agree. So many crimes that we deal with are rooted in mental health issues, homelessness, addiction. And I think all of us who care about the policing profession agree we need to find ways that we can address those issues and not necessarily bring someone into the system, because that's generally not going to help them. It'll just probably, if anything, exacerbate it. And as someone who's gone through the LEAD program and actually brought LEAD to my city, I think that it's an incredible program, because it's an alternative to incarceration, and for low-level offenses that, again, are rooted elsewhere. What a great way to deal with it. And for the listeners and viewers, that's the Captain Britt just answered the question. It was, if he could change one thing in law enforcement currently in American policing, what would it be? And if I heard correctly, it's really to focus on the human element, Captain.
Right. It's the idea of shifting our focus to just helping people. I on my whiteboard way above my head, you can't read it, but I'm trying to change the mission statement of the Seattle Police Department to 6 words. Our job is to help people. That's nice and easy to remember. If everything we did was focused on that one idea, I think we could change the culture of this agency and of law enforcement as a whole if we focused on that one idea. If everything we did was designed to help people, and acknowledging that it's not just the victims we're helping. Sometimes it's the people that we arrest. We're helping them get what they need to get better and become a more contributory member of society.
Agree. And, even, we look at some of the main causation factors: homelessness, addiction, mental health. But let's face it, someone could be just having a really bad day, and now they're suddenly finding themselves, on the other side of the law. And why would we not want to consider that could easily be any of us by just a set of circumstances, or, again, something as simple as a bad day that everyone understands. So I think that mission statement should probably be the mission statement of policing across our country. And we'll give you credit,
Trademark.
Captain. Captain, we'll give you credit for that.
Patent pending.
My next question that I'd like to ask is, you're obviously, as a captain, that's an amazingly high rank that has the ability to truly affect the policing in your agency and beyond. What do you have as future career goals that you'd like to achieve?
So my goal when I became a police officer was I wanted to be a captain. I wanted to run a precinct. And I've got 19 years on, and in Washington State, you can retire at either 53 years old or 30 years on. I got hired when I was 23 years old, so I'm going to turn 53 when I hit my 30 years. So I've got 11 years to go before I can retire. And so my goal is to use those 11 years to basically make Seattle PD better. And I know that's a very broad statement, and it's kind of, again, very, very Dudley Do Right Pie in the sky. But my current work is in technology. My position is technology integration for the police department, and my goal thus far has been to put the best tech that we can in officers' hands so they can do more with less, free up their time to return to that mission of helping people. My goal is to get back to running a precinct eventually. I'd like to get back into operations and run my own precinct, but that's after I set up a technology shop that currently doesn't exist with Seattle PD. But career goals, I've pretty much reached the rank that I wanted. But now my goal is to change the culture and change the mission to focus more on that idea of helping people instead of just being the long arm of the law, if you will.
Yeah, and they say, and I truly believe that in crisis is opportunity. And obviously policing is in such a state of crisis, and these are the opportunities I think that will come out that we can really truly reinvent in terms of the focus and that guardian mindset. And I think what you're doing is exactly that. As we're closing up, just for time's sake here, is there anything you'd like to add, or anything that you think the viewers and listeners may gain value in whether it's policing or terms of LEPSL, or anything that you think you would want them to hear and know?
For anybody listening who's not yet in the LEPSL program, but is in policing or thinking about policing, and you already have your bachelor's degree, I could not recommend the LEPSL program more. Especially the value. It's easily one of the least expensive master's programs you'll find, and yet the value on return of investment is incredible. Every single course is tailored to exactly what we need to be able to do. For those that are in the LEPSL program, my advice to them would be pay attention, study hard, ask lots of questions, and interact as much as you possibly can with your fellow cohort members, because the insights you get from other agencies are incredible. I had a lieutenant with San Francisco PD, Sean Frost. He and I worked on a group project together during one of our classes, and he was facing a lot of the same challenges San Francisco as Seattle was, and so we had a lot of good commiseration and collaboration on how they're addressing things. So the interoperation between you and your fellow officers and your fellow LEPSL members is invaluable. But the each class, as boring as they might seem, or as tedious as some of them might be, you'll take nuggets from each of them and use them almost on a daily basis. So I can't say enough good things about the LEPSL program. My goal is to make it mandatory for every person in my department above the rank of captain. I think just the leadership lessons alone would be incredibly valuable to many people who have risen to rank by virtue of just taking a civil service test, but haven't necessarily achieved a lot of leadership experience or training. So the lessons learned there are incredibly invaluable.
Yeah, and I second that completely. Everything you just said from the West Coast, I agree 100%. Here on the East Coast, we all share the same problems, the same challenges. How do we recruit? How do we regain trust? How do we do more with less? All these things, and LEPSL's where it's at. I couldn't agree more. Captain, I just want to thank you. I know Kylie's going to come back in now. I think you've provided so much information for the viewers and listeners, and as the host, I learned a tremendous amount, so thank you.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to chat with you guys today.
Great. Thank you both so much for a really eye-opening interview. Some really great information there for people who might not be as aware of the issues that you're facing. And thank you to all the viewers that tuned in. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to meet the law enforcement heroes and leaders who are a part of the MS-LEPSL family. And if you would like to watch previous episodes of Blue Leadership, you can find them on the video tab of our Facebook page or by searching USD Blue Leadership on YouTube. Thank you everyone so much, and we will see you all next time.